Welcome back to the Humble Market Timer YouTube channel. If you enjoy the content, please remember to hit the like button, comment, and subscribe. Today I'll discuss Bitcoin, when I think it will bottom, and at what price, and what it will likely do next after it bottoms. But before I go any further, let me first show you my disclaimer. Please read it carefully. I want to just make sure that I let you know I'm not an investment advisor. I'm just a guy who has followed the markets for a long time, and I'm just providing some of my own personal insights regarding what will happen in various markets. My videos are for educational purposes, and again, these are my own personal commentaries. Now that we've gotten that out the way, let's get back to the video. Now, I'm a proponent that the market works in what's called market cycles. And basically what a market cycle is, it's a predictive ebb and flow in which there's buying and selling. It's not random, really. Now, there are things that can occur in the world that may cause prices to spike and prices to drop. But in the long scope of things, there's a natural progression of buying and selling regardless of those blips that may occur that may cause spikes or drops. Now, the most common market cycle that people often refer to is called the Benner cycle. And the Benner cycle is something that I'm not going to get too in-depth in. If you're really interested in it, I challenge you to look it up and study about the Benner cycle. It's a very common talked about piece in helping people figure out when are the years and time frames when it's good to buy and when it's a good time to sell. Now, the Benner cycle works long range. We're talking about decades, centuries. I mean, it's a long cycle. That is something that, again, is very established. What I have been interested, though, in is there some sort of market cycle that someone has developed that's more for a shorter time frame? Because it's a much more difficult and less mainstream idea that isn't very commonplace, but it's something that I think would be useful to many people who are interested in investing in the stock market or in various other markets. And there's a gentleman by the name of Larry Williams who I have studied a good bit on, who has been a long-time investor, long-time trader, well-respected in the investment community. He has developed a market cycle that actually works within the course of a year. This guy, he's quite a character. He's written many books. And he does many interviews, and he drops gems here and there in his interviews. He's famous in one of his interviews for saying that he moved to the Virgin Islands because they have a program there where you could start a business there and you only have to pay 3.9% in income tax. And he is avoiding the extreme capital gains taxes that you have to pay, particularly if you're trading, which can be 20-30% or higher depending on how much money you make. He has figured out a way that by moving to the Virgin Islands, he can avoid all those taxes that he would normally have to pay. But again, he's quite a character, and he drops several Jews regarding trading and investing. And he talked recently in an interview, I think it was around early November of 2024, and he talked about Bitcoin and where he felt it would all of a sudden have a downturn, and at what point it would start to come back up out of its bottom. And I will show a snippet of the video, and we'll get back to my video. Fair use.
So my Bitcoin forecast was turned negative middle of April. Says the rally we've been in now is about through. We should come down to the 1st of November, rally up, but the best buy point comes in April of next year. So I continue to see this market at a down pattern. So that's
so we're looking towards April on a cycle analysis.
I think the next best time to buy is going to be April. Yeah.
So Mr. Williams, again, very well respected in the investment community and the trading community. Through his analysis and his market cycles, again, in that shorter time frame, he believes that Bitcoin will start to bottom and turn back up in April. So that's one point of view. Again, very respected. I follow him. At your leisure, look him up, follow his work. He's written several books. Very interesting guy. Let's see, though, based on what we're seeing in the charts, if that makes sense, though. Okay. First, here's a chart of Bitcoin. And what I have here is this is the price action. And at the bottom is the RSI, or what's also known as the Relative Strength Index. And what's amazing about the Relative Strength Index, particularly if you have it over a time frame, like for example of a week, if you can find the strength range, and there's an upper and lower range, if you can find that range, it's amazing how predictive it can be of when the actual price action will bottom and top. As you can see here, in the structure back in 2020, 2022, you saw that it traded within this upper and lower band here, and it stayed in that band, and the middle portion of the band acts also as part of the trading range. And it's amazing how when the stock, or when the RSI is above the middle range, for a considerable period of time, it trades to the top of the band, and when it trades below that middle portion for an extended period of time, it always goes to the bottom portion of the band. And you'll notice that pretty clear here in this structure. Now, looking at the current structure, again, this was back in that 2020, 2022 area. Now, looking at it now, you can see, again, I think we have found the upper and lower range of how this is going to trade, and we'll be able to see the strength of the move. Now, based on the strength, we can see that it has traded in that middle portion. It broke well above the middle portion, so it hit that upper band. Then it went back to the middle portion. It went below the middle portion. When it goes below that middle portion for an extended period of time, it then hits the bottom portion of the band. Then it went again back up, hit the top part of the band, and we are going back down. You see, we blew through the middle portion of this band here, and we are now approaching this lower band again. So what the RSI is telling us is that likely the next time we have some weakness in the markets, we will probably hit this lower portion of the band. And Mr. Williams is saying that we'll get that weakness within the next 2 to 6 weeks. And if you look at how Bitcoin is trading and where it is on the RSI, I can see that happening in that 2 to 6 week time frame of let me draw it, this RSI working its way down to here and getting that touch on the lower band. So I think I'm in agreement with Mr. Williams regarding April, end of March, April being the time where I also believe Bitcoin will bottom. Now let's look at what we think that target will be as far as price when Bitcoin does bottom. Let's look and see if we can figure that out. Let's first check the fibs, or the Fibonacci retracement for Bitcoin. Let's look at this chart and let's draw the fibs from the swing low up to the swing high. And based on the fibs, we see that, and as I talked about, if I want you to just go back and look at my previous video regarding Ethereum, and I talked a little bit more about Fibonacci retracements. They're consistent retracement points where when a stock moves up, it retraces back to certain points. And you'll notice that the first point that's typical is the 236, and we moved all up to the top. And again, look where it initially stopped, right at that 236. And then the next portion, when it retraces, it goes to the 382. But the most common retracement points are the 0.5 and the 618. And as you can see, it had its last downturn and it got to that 0.5 retracement, which is about in that $78,000, $79,000, $77,000 range. So that's where the last bottom occurred in Bitcoin. And that happened a couple weeks ago. And what I believe will occur is that we will next hit that 618 in the next downturn that will take us to the lower portion of that RSI channel. So we're looking at, based on the fibs, price dropping to that 72 to 70,000 price range. And if we get a little deeper drop, it may drop all the way down to the 786. And the 786 puts the pricing at a little above 60,000, 62,000. I believe that's probably worst case where we go based on the fall that's remaining on the RSI for when we hit that bottom channel. We'll then get a bounce in the price action. So that's the action. Those are the price points based on the fibs. We're talking about around between 60,000 and 70,000. Those look like the key price points for when Bitcoin should bottom. And again, it's a scenario where no one should ever put their money, all their money in at one price point. You want to find a good price point, and then you can scale in if it goes lower, and then you can build your position if you do happen to pick the bottom portion in your first initial buys. Now let's look to see if there's some confluence or there's some similarities or something that can verify the Fibonacci retrace with just drawing parallels. Now, as I mentioned in that Ethereum video, most of stock market price movement is based on algorithms, math, and shapes. That's why there's so much symmetry in how things move and how you can vary with some sort of accuracy predict what can happen in the future in the price action in certain markets. So as you see here, I've drawn parallels. I took the peak of 2018 and I connected it to the peak of 2021. And then there was another peak later on in 2021. And it's amazing how it aligned to the peaks of 2024 and 2025. Look how amazing that is. The peaks just line up almost perfectly. And if you drop a parallel down and you drop it down to the lowest point of the parallel, you'll see all this trade action, and it gives you a view of how the stock is moving over a long period of time. I also drew a couple of channels for the short term. Here I connected the tops of this last move that Bitcoin has made off its bottom to the bottoms of that last move, and it gives us a widening, broadening wedge. And typically, the price action will trade between the upper and lower regions of that widening, broadening wedge. So as you see here, if you put the price point about right here, you'll see that that will hit around that $68,000 to $72,000 price range. That lines up with the fib retracement. So based on what we've seen with the fibs and what we've seen with our parallels and how things line up in the parallels, it makes sense for initial entries to go in for the bottom of Bitcoin to be in that $70,000 to $72,000 range. We currently are trading at about $82,000 to $83,000, but I believe we'll get at least one more downturn to have us possibly hit that area. And if we get a more vicious downturn, we could go as low as about probably that $60,000 range. So keep that in mind for price targets, and we'll see in coming weeks or coming months if we go below that or if those price points prove to be true. Now, I want to take a look at one more thing. I want to show you where I think Bitcoin will go in the very near future based on those bottoming price points of in that $60,000 range to that $70,000 range. I also want to make note of I also drew another parallel where I took the top of the 2017 high and I extended it to the lower portion of that initial move from 2017 to 2021 to the bottom. And I drove it up and created a parallel from the bottom to the top of that. And if you notice, it has acted as support for much of the moves in Bitcoin. It has broke above that line, and then it's come back down and acted as support, and going back up, going back down to that line, acted as support, broke through, and went all the way back down to that lower band. And eventually, I'm of the belief that when we have the major correction for Bitcoin, we will eventually work our way back to this bottom trend line of the long-term grind of Bitcoin back from 2017. Just wanted to point that out. Now let's look at where I believe Bitcoin will go in the future. And I want you to pay attention to this structure and this structure. want you to pay close attention to that. I want you to pay close attention to it. Okay? Now, I want you to notice how in this structure that we had an M top, but in the M top in technical trading is very bearish. But what's key in this is I want you to see, look at the similarity in the left side of the structure compared to the right side of the structure. Look how similar it is. You'll find, and again, I mentioned before, the stock market is based on shapes, math, algorithms, structure, trends, things of that nature. You'll find throughout the stock market, throughout how stocks have traded over years, similar patterns and structures in the movement up versus the movement down. And many times the movement up mirrors or is a direct reflection of the movement down. Let me kind of show you. Here's sort of a similar picture. Now, let's take this and let's flip it. And you see how similar that is to how it looked when we initially had it. Oh, what happened to me? Oh, there we go. My fault. How it initially looked coming on this side. It's so similar. And what we often find is that the structure keeps the same shape and form on the way up as it does on the way down. Now, it is my belief that Bitcoin will trade in potentially two different ways. And I think those two different ways will be similar to this structure over here in different ways. Now, I had that initial structure that we duplicated right here. This structure here, I believe, could be the same as this structure here. This left side is the same as this structure here. And we're potentially creating another M-top pattern where you have, again, this action is almost identical to this action. Now, this period in here is a shorter time frame. This is a weekly chart, but this is a shorter time frame than this. This is probably about twice as long, but the structure is still very similar. So one possible scenario that I think can occur is you have a scenario where we come down and we hit our bottom here, and then we stroll up, and then we work our way back for a double top, or a top that's slightly above the top that we hit in the early part of this year. This would give us a similar action to this, and then this structure right here would resemble this action right here before we eventually come back down and then hit this lower action, this lower band right here, much later on in the year 2026. So that's one possible scenario where, again, you have a similar structure to this happening here. Now, I believe this structure can occur if we don't have any major issues with the market. We bottom in the next 2 to 6 weeks, and then we don't have any major issues, or we have some positive things that may occur, whether it be we don't have any issues with inflation and the government or the Fed gets the freedom to lower interest rates, which puts Bitcoin and other risk assets in a very positive scenario to continue to move north. Or we don't have any major issues in the market. This would be the type of action that I could see occurring in that scenario. Let's see if I can remove this. Bear with me. Okay, got rid of that line. Okay. Now, the second scenario is that this structure is not this structure, but it's more of this structure. It's the left side of this structure. So you have the structure where it goes up here, comes down and back up. That looks a lot like the structure that comes here, came down a little bit, and then it comes up. You see the similar double top spike here and sort of an M top action. And a possible scenario is where the price action looks like this, where it comes down, bottoms up temporarily, but we only go up just a little bit, and then we come down and we end up heading back to that lower band that way. So again, if you look, you see how there's a similar structure on this side of the price action. There's a similar structure going up versus a similar structure going down. And see how this is very similar to this particular portion. This is a scenario, I think that's a more bearish scenario. This will be a scenario where, let's say, inflation starts to creep up and we don't get any resolution with some of the wars that are going on in the Ukraine and Russia, or we can't get the tariff situation squared away. We'd have a situation here where we would bottom, get a slight bounce, but eventually we wouldn't be able to have enough juice to make a new high, and we'd work our way back down to this lower band. And just to kind of give you a picture of what it would look like on the RSI, it would, as we said, it would come down here, touch that bottom portion of the line, go back up to this midpoint line, straddle that midpoint line, but eventually work its way back to the lower band instead of going back up to the upper band. And I want to show you how this type of action has worked in other charts, in other companies, other stocks. Here's a picture of, I keep showing that disconnect, but here's a picture of ELF. ELF is a company. Look at how similar this structure is to this structure. And I'm going to do a breakdown of ELF at another point in time. But again, I wanted to show you how common and how often this type of structure occurs in charting. And look at the symmetry. Look at how similar the action was going up and how almost identical the action has occurred on the way down. So those are the things I think you need to be looking for in the near future with Bitcoin. I think we will bottom in that $60,000 to $70,000 price range. Keep an eye on that area. And I think I may try to maybe scale in starting in that 70,000 price range. And then you can monitor how the overall markets, the macro, monitor if things are progressing positively or things are progressing negatively. And that can give you some insight on how the structure of Bitcoin will look in the very near future as we head towards the end of 2025 into 2026. Hope you enjoyed the video. Again, please like, comment, and subscribe. And I hope to see you on the next video. Thanks. Bye-bye.